why it is that the younger people aren't starting as many businesses. So there's a number of factors. It isn't just any one thing. It's a lot of them. But if I were to put my finger on the biggest one thing, it's that they're not told to start businesses. They're told to, they're told to go to school, behave, take a bunch of drugs, to behave. If they can't behave, right, they have to take a bunch of drugs. And then when they get out, they have to go to work for a company because that's the idea of security. It's actually the illusion of security. There's no actual security, as people are finding out more and more nowadays. They don't, I mean, how many companies, how many people expect to work at a company for 35 or 40 years now? Nobody, right? So there's no actual security with any of this, but it's the illusion of security. Because remember, for the older generations, for some people, that worked, right? I mean, if you were a boomer and you started your career in, say, 1970, 78, 79, for you, you probably could make it all the way through. But that was the last generation that could do that. Even Gen Xers don't get that anymore. Most of us, every Gen Xer I know, they've changed entire career fields probably 3 or 4 times. In my case, I've lost count of how many different career fields and businesses that I've started and owned, because I don't work for the companies, I work for myself. So I mean, but I actually have to have my wife remind me of all the businesses that I've been involved in. So to explain, that's the number one, in my view, is that they're not told to do that. Number 2 is that the way of starting a business now is not what it was back in the day. So let's go back let's just go to the 80s, not even back into the 50s and 60s. Let's just go to the 80s. If you wanted to start a business, you could go to smaller banks, smaller banking institutions that were local-ish. And if you had a good idea for a business, and they thought that you had the skill set necessary to run it successfully and be able to pay back any loans with interest, you had a pretty good shot of getting a business loan to actually start that business and run it successfully. And the bankers at the time, a lot of them, because it was smaller banking institutions, a lot of them were usually business guys themselves, right? They'd been around for a while. They were older. These were and a lot of back then, it'd be the World War II gen guys, right? These guys had experience. They understood what questions to ask. They understood, how your cash flow had to work, and then how to not rob the business from its profitability so that you could continue to grow it to at least to a certain point where it would maintain profitability. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. Now everything is all based on credit score, which is a scam. It's all based on, do you have any other assets? Remember, if you followed any of my work for any length of time, you know how to get a loan. The number one way to get a loan from any bank, no matter what it is to have more to lose than the bank does. That's it. That's the number one way. So this is why you can say, like, well, but I know my friend's dad started a business. Like, okay, and he borrowed a bunch of money. Yes. Did he go to the bank? Yes, he did. Did the bank give him the money for the business? Probably not. What they said was, oh, you have a house that's paid for. Oh, well, let's just give you a new mortgage, and then we'll give you a rewrap, or we'll do a refi, or a HELOC, or something like that. They weren't lending money for the business. They don't give a shit about the business. They were just lending the money based on the assets that the guy already had. That's not the same deal. So, and of course, if you don't have any assets as it is, because millennials and Zoomers don't have a lot of assets, and like I said before in my Gen X video, or one of the Gen X videos that I did, a lot of Gen X is in the same case. They're in the same position. A lot. 50–60% of Gen Xers, they don't have lots of assets either. So, and the banks aren't keen to loan them any money either, especially nowadays since the banking consolidation has continued. I don't want to make this video about banking consolidation, but that is a major problem. There are fewer and fewer and fewer options of places to go to get lending, to go get funding, to start a business. So that's the first part of that. The other reason, of course, is that a lot of businesses aren't profitable anymore. They cannot be profitable because what they're competing against are large companies that live in a post-profit environment. Now, let me explain what that means. So many banking institutions, all these big institutions, have a lot of money in these other big institutions, right? They're not really interested in lending you money to go compete against these big institutions. They also know that you can't compete against them because most of these big institutions are heavily federally subsidized. And if they're not directly federally subsidized, they're indirectly federally subsidized. What is indirect subsidy? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's when the Fed prints a bunch of money And because they're an opaque organization that has no accountability to anybody, anyone at all, they can do whatever they want. They print a bunch of money that's counterfeit, that's off the books. It's called off the books. That money gets funneled to an offshore corporation, which then funnels it to another offshore corporation, which then funnels it to another offshore corporation, who then, that money then goes into a hedge fund, and then that hedge fund invests a bunch of money in these companies to keep them propped up. Because if you notice, most CEOs, they don't care about whether the company's healthy or not. I've already been over this a dozen times. They don't care if the company's healthy. What they care about is, is the stock price going to stay up? That's all they care about. They don't really care whether the company's healthy. Okay, most of these companies are massively unhealthy, but as long as the stock price stays high, what do they care, right? So they're incentivized to do that. And so it gives the illusion. Remember, stock price is just an illusion. It's just to make it look like everything is going great. It makes everything look as though, oh, well, everybody's excited about this. Yeah, it's fake. I've spent years now trying to explain to anybody who will listen that all of this stuff is fake that you're seeing. So younger people, when they say, well, how do we start a business? They do the same thing. They kind of look at this and go, how am I going to compete? And so those who do start businesses, they realize very quickly, that first of all, every scam in the world wants to take advantage of a small business. Oh my God, I could do classes just on shit not to do in business. Not stuff to do, just what not to do, because at least it'll save you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. But that's the biggest reason it's not really taught. There's a lot of those profitability problems. You can't really get a whole lot of funding. And of course, on top of that, a lot of businesses, in the old days, right, they had to have a place, and you were building equity in the business. So not just equity in the business itself, but the business itself was building equity, meaning that like you owned the property, you owned the building. That's not the case anymore. Think, just like I talked about with franchises. What do you own when you start a franchise? Nothing. Nothing. You gave that franchise company, $1 million to buy that franchise, or $500,000, or $2 million, or $3 million in some cases to buy that franchise. And they own the property, they own the building, they own the equipment, they own everything in it, they own the name, they own everything. And you have to buy all your products from them, or they're approved suppliers. You have no freedom and flexibility whatsoever. None of it's yours. You're a glorified manager. So that's what ends up happening. And of course, there's also the, like I said, that illusion of security that people have, that like, well, businesses are insecure, whereas I can just make somebody else, pay me this wage, and that's security. It's not. So those are probably the biggest reasons, I would say. I mean, again, there's a ton of other factors, but those are probably the biggest reasons I can think of off the top of my head why a lot of millennials and Zoomers are not starting small businesses. They just look at the numbers, they look at what's going on, and they also see how many small business owners, how little money they make. I'm saying this as a business owner myself. I don't make a lot of money, and they see that. They're like, yeah, those guys don't make a lot of money after everything. No, they really don't. They have more freedom, but that's about it. So it depends on what you cherish. You cherish shitty, worthless, garbage paper, nonsense dollars, or you cherish your freedom.